Welcome back to Saints Squad. I'm your host, Dylan Sanders of Saints Wire, and I'm just going to say it. I think Taylor and Landry are good together.
I'm Ross Jackson, host of Locked On Saints podcast, and I've officially gone from not being able to afford to go to Saints games to billboards outside of Saints arenas promoting a podcast that I do, which is pretty crazy.
What a flex. John Hendricks, New Orleans football. Hefe, would you say I have a plethora of piñatas?
It's the Saints Squad, sponsored by Gametime. Everything New Orleans Saints, every week. Covering all the big hits and game-changing plays from down in the Big Easy, the way only Locked On Podcast Network can. Get ready and squad up. It's the Saints Squad show, starting now.
Howdy, United Nation, and welcome back to the Saints Squad, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making us your first listen every Monday and Thursday. We have a unique group of experts here ready to bring you a fun and informative show on everything New Orleans Saints. I promise Lance Moore is still part of this podcast, but
Grandma.
he's just the good news is he finally got off the phone with his grandma, but as he hung up with his grandma, a cobra came and bit him in the head. So now he is afflicted, just like John. Get well soon. My sources say that he'll be back on Monday.
Love it. Boy, these cobras are getting crazy out here.
Yeah, Lance will be here. Lance will be here on Monday. But for now, we have us three here to talk. We're going to be talking Foster Moreau, some tight end season preview. We're going to talk about the receiver room and who's going to step up in it, some roster underdogs, and then the biggest roster concerns we have heading into this year. That's where we're going to start out. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. John, start us off today with your biggest roster concerns.
Is there anything bigger than the quarterback position? I mean, there's a lot of them, right?
Nice.
Like there is a lot of roster concerns on this roster. Yeah, so that tracks. But I think it's quarterback, right? I mean, you get this position right, then things look fantastic for this team. This outlook looks even better. If you don't get it right, then next year, are you going to have to go back and draft another quarterback and try to do this entire process over again? But again, based off of what we've seen, I think it's been promising. I'm not ready to crown a starter totally yet. I'm not ready to tell you that the Saints are in a great spot when it comes to the quarterback roster or quarterback outlook, but so much hinges on the quarterback, which is the most important position on the roster. Win, lose, or draw when it comes to a good quarterback on your roster, and we see it. If the Bills don't have Josh Allen, they're not good. If the Chiefs don't have Patrick Mahomes, they're just not good. If the Ravens don't have Lamar Jackson, they're not good. If the Eagles don't have Jalen Hurts, they're not good. Like, I mean, they can compensate. They can do some things because I think they have some good areas of strength on their rosters to be able to compete and still be able to do it. But the Saints, I mean, they got to get this thing right. And so whether it's Tyler Shuck, whether it's Spencer Rattler, I'm excited to see where things go when it comes to training camp. I'm excited to see where it goes in the preseason. And we've talked about it on this show, just because the person who's starting in week 1 doesn't necessarily mean they're going to start in week 10. And so, again, I'm concerned about it in the sense of what is the play, where things go from here, who's going to be the starter. Can they be the long-term starter? Or is it a short-term thing? Because it's important. I mean, we talked about Tyler Shuck, of his importance to this team because of it was a handpick by Kellen Moore. And they used a 2nd-round pick on him, the highest pick they've done in ever, right? And since Archie Manning and such, so it's relevant. But Spencer Rattler's like, hold my beer, I got a chance here. He's embraced this thing, and so on the surface, I love what they have. They're not bringing in a veteran at this point. I love that too because we've talked about that, and so, but it is a concerning position, and there's a lot of them. You can go at everyone and kind of nitpick it, but quarterback's got to be the top one, man.
I think that's a really good pick, John. And I understand where you're coming from in terms of like where the concern is, because I think the concern goes beyond this year too. Like, do you really know that one of these two guys is your starter in 2026? Not really, right? Like,
Can't say that confident. No.
Yeah, you can't say that right now. You have to wait and see how the 2025 season plays out. But let's say that the Saints pick their quarterback, they ride with that quarterback, and then they are in position to draft a quarterback again highly in 2026. That probably means that things didn't go great for that young quarterback. And so you might be tempted to go right back to what's supposed to be, and I'm going to use very, very heavy air quotes because I feel like we say this every year. It's supposed to be a really good quarterback class. And then once the quarterback class rolls around, everybody goes, these quarterbacks stink. And so it's just kind of how like the NFL draft works. But like if you're in that position again, then that concern goes on for another year and then potentially another year. Like this is the really, really tough part of rebuilding a team is getting the quarterback right.
I mean, I think you just have to take as many swings as you can until you get it. And that's why I think we've said it before. I'm fine. Like if Spencer Rattler turns into the starting quarterback and Tyler Shuck ends up not really playing, I'm still not mad at the decision to draft Tyler Shuck because you're just taking swings. You don't know what you have until you test it. So I think that, again, this is kind of the frustrating thing about a rebuild is the constant switch at quarterback until you find the guy. But there's also a reason why it's like the hardest position to find in the NFL. It's just because there's so few actual great quarterbacks in the NFL and in the world.
Didn't you write something about this one time, Dylan, about like retired, like teams trying to rebound from the retirement of a Hall of Fame caliber quarterback?
Yeah,
how long? Do you remember what that research was and like what it took? Because it was like the Packers were like the outlier who just like keep getting lucky and lucky and lucky at quarterback, but then everybody else took time.
I don't remember off the top of my head, honestly, but I know it was like at least 5 years. At least 5 years. Like it takes a long time to find your next starter.
Yeah.
I think 5 years is on the low end.
23, 24, 25. Hey, 5. This is the 5th year.
Fifth year.
So the math,
you gotta get it.
The math maybe says that this is it.
And I was going to say I mean, that's a great point because I was thinking that too, as like for a team that did not prepare at all for when Drew, life after Drew. I mean, they've said, we'll just do free agency. And it just hasn't worked. So I'm excited to see them rebuild. But you're talking about teams who, like, I just think about the 90s, the Bills after Jim Kelly or the Dolphins after Dan Marino or the Cowboys after Troy Aikman, or life after Steve Young. I mean, you want to hit, like you want to be the Packers and go, from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers, but that doesn't really happen. So, I mean, that's a good call and a good flex. I'd love to see what you came up with on that piece too, Dylan, because that's a heck of a pull.
Yeah, it was a really fun. I used to do a bunch of more like math and stuff related, like the
nerd
Thomas.
Okay. We're all nerds.
All right. I'm gonna go ahead with my roster concern because I'm gonna jump off of John's because it kind of goes similar. Is that the quarterbacks need someone to throw to, and I think my biggest concern right now is the depth of the wide receiver room. I want to say specifically because I do really like Chris Olave. I like Rashid Shaheed. Brandon Cooks, even I do think has some room to thrive in this offense with like Olave or Shaheed being used in the slot, opening up something for Cooks on the outside.
Yeah,
I think that but there's not really much after that, and there's not much variety between those three receivers. They all kind of do the same thing and feel like the same style of receiver. So I feel like that there's not a ton of depth. And I've said before, I think that Donovan Peoples-Jones could be an interesting player, but you can't do anything with that until he actually puts something on the field. I like the idea of Bub Means breaking out, but we can't say for certain that Bub Means is going to be a 600-yard receiver or anything like that. So I think that my biggest concern is that there are a bunch of pieces that could work out or could be that fourth option in an offense, but no one that you can there's no one for certain after the top three that I think, this guy is going to have a consistent role in the Saints offense this year. And I think that's concerning. I think we saw how that really came back to bite them last year whenever Olave and Shaheed went down. And guess what? Those are still the same two receivers. And guess what? They're still gonna be prone to an injury. Like it just seems like it's who they are. Like not saying they will, but it could happen. And if one of those two guys comes out, it's immediately the worst receiver room in the league, in my opinion. Like if you're losing one of those guys, it becomes so one dimensional and so hard. And so I just think my concern is I really just don't know where they would go past those three guys. And I like some of the pieces, like I said, but it's just the uncertainty for me is the big issue.
I think there's something way to that because I mean, think about it, how the run game kind of fell off too without Taysom Hill, right?
Yeah.
Or if you don't have Alvin Kamara and if you don't have Brandon Cooks, I mean, if you don't have Rashid Shaheed or you don't have Chris Olave, I mean, it does fall off considerably. And look, I would say probably that guy would be Cedric Wilson Jr. Maybe that would probably get it because he has familiarity with Kellen Moore's offense. Obviously, we pointed on the show he's had his best success when he was with Dallas and Kellen Moore in that offense. Now I'm going to sit here and tell you he's going to be this gangbusters. No, but again, this is kind of the issue with this Saints team is one injury can derail the entire outlook of the position and somewhat affect the team. And so again, if Olave goes down, we know he has concussion history, right? And that's not a fun thing to deal with. And hopefully that doesn't continue to happen. Rashid Shaheed's coming off of the meniscus surgery, right? And so again, you hope he's good to go. Cooks has had some injury history last year, you know, and so again, it's a great call because the receiver position, if you're a young quarterback, whether it's Tyler Shuck or Spencer Rattler, you need a safety. Like you need those veteran guys. You need Brandon Cooks who knows where he needs to go on the field and be where exactly he needs to be able to make that throw. Same thing with Olave and Shaheed. But if you're having to wait until the back half of the year and get somebody like a Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and then in the 8 games he plays, he almost has as many yards as Chris Olave does. Like that's a crazy thing. Like nobody else on the roster stepped up. They had to get somebody off the street to make it work. Crazy.
And I just want to say, Kellen, I'm empathetic. I'm empathetic to you because we just
forgot
lost
that Kellen listens to the show.
Yeah, we just lost a wide receiver for this week, and we're in complete chaos. So I can't imagine what it would feel like for you.
Yes. I think sorry, that one took me a second. I was like, does he mean LSU? Like, what is he? I meant Lance Moore, wide receiver. Right. I think my concern with the wide receiver room is purely down to health. I mean, as you guys have highlighted, like Chris Olave coming off of a season-ending situation, right? Even though he got back to practice at the end of the year, didn't go back to the field, right? Didn't go back to the active roster. Rashid Shaheed had a season-ending surgery or a surgery that turned into a season-ending surgery. And then Brandon Cooks had, surgery has had, different injuries over the course of the past few years as well. But Means had an injury and setback that kept him off the field. So for me, this one really, like, my concern around the wide receiver room takes my focus directly to Ted Rath. And can you keep these guys healthy? Can you help them stay on the field? And the team just lost its director of rehabilitation and Jonathan Gress. And I'm going to be honest, I don't know if that's a bad thing or a good thing. I have no idea. But rehab has not been one of the Saints' strong suits over the course of the past few years, like setbacks and all these other things. And so perhaps that ends up going in a different direction. That's a positive direction for them too. So we'll see. But I think for me, like the concern around the wide receiver room takes my focus directly over to the sports performance team and what changes they're implementing to help keep these guys healthy and on the field. Although it comes down to the player too, right? Individual players have to do things that keep them healthy, keep them on the field, all those other things too. It's not just the staff's responsibility.
Yeah. All right. And then Ross, what is your biggest concern?
Yeah, I'll go quick. I'm just going to lean on like roster concern for me is the roster adjusting to its new schemes. New offensive scheme, new defensive scheme, and the defensive scheme is a mad deviation away from what it was they did before. Multiple fronts, but a lot of even fronts, a lot of press man coverage. Now they're going into multiple fronts, but a lot of odd fronts to base, and then they're going to more zone match coverages, so a lot more watching the quarterback, eyes in the backfield kind of stuff for the coverage players. So I think those are the two big concerns for me. And again, more question marks than concerns because we know that this is a rebuild situation and that this is going to take time. But that to me is the biggest thing is how quickly does the roster catch on to its new scheme. And we had the same question about the offense last year. And for the first 2 games, it looked like they caught on to it immediately. But then you see how the kind of ebbs and flows go. So it's a consistency that needs to be shown in terms of catching on, not just the flash in the pan at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking about concerns and some more negative things. So let's get a little bit happier in the next one and talk about some roster underdogs that we're rooting for coming up next. Kai Harley recently reached into Mickey Loomis's pocket and found out he had some money left over to maybe add a fun free agent like Gabe Davis or Asante Samuel Jr. You want to get on the fun? That's where today's sponsor, Monarch Money, can help you out. It's like your own personal Kai Harley, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your wealth and start building on it. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Coming back with us, we are going to jump into some roster underdogs. It's players that we like that maybe aren't getting enough shine out there. And let's start with John.
Yeah, I've got 2. I got 1 and an honorable mention, but I'll start with, I always buck the trends, right? But I'm going to start doing a little bit different of an approach. Yeah. I'm going to go with Rico Payton because I think my obvious answer is somebody that they drafted and is on the defensive side. But anyway, somebody else might have. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to go with Rico Payton because I think the secondary, you talk about the secondary, the uncertainty there. Look, there's a lot of, I don't say pressure, but with what they're doing with Alontae Taylor, and he's going to be based on the outside, and opposite is going to be Kool-Aid McKinstry. That position has also had some trouble staying healthy as well. And you brought in Isaac Yiadom, and I feel good about that. You drafted Quincy Riley, but look, Rico Payton was a guy that, again, you follow his track history, an undrafted rookie. Then he comes in here out of the University of Pittsburgh, not Pittsburgh, but the different Pittsburgh, right? It's a completely different thing. But he comes in here, he's struggling somewhat in the first half of training camp. Like, it just was tough. Like, every time they would want to make a big play or they want to do something, they target against Rico Payton. But he had something that just flipped the switch, and then suddenly he looks fantastic, and he got the special teams down. I mean, he was somebody that was handpicked by Darren Rizzi that came in here and did really well in special teams, but he added some extra on the defense. And so during the course of the preseason, he looked fantastic, a good shutdown guy in a way. I mean, that really doesn't happen. And he ends up making the roster as an undrafted rookie. And so I love him as an underdog going into this camp. I think he's somebody that nobody really does talk about a lot. I left him off of my initial 53 when I did it way too early the other day. But I just think that he has this opportunity. I think he is somebody that can come in, and Ross even pointed this out before, guys like Rajon Wright, another one that had potentially can do something. I like Rico Payton. I think he has a lot to offer. I think he's going to even grow better now with Terry Joseph and Brandon Staley. And so the injuries are going to end up happening. There's things are going to happen. I think his bread and butter is still going to be special teams, but I expect to see a stronger Rico Payton in year 2 going into training camp that might surprise some people. And I think his performance can make him be on that final roster, and he might end up shocking a few people.
I love that.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Rico was always kind of the big surprising guy during the preseason last year. I think it was Target. Yes. He was the closest defender on like 17 targets, but only 3 catches during that time, and had like a pair of pass breakups. By the way, Pittsburgh State University in Kansas. And a former or a famous alum, Gary Busey, a name you haven't thought about in a long time. I don't know why I remember that, but I don't know why I remember that, but I do.
Rookie of the year, man.
Shout out Gary Busey. Gary Busey. I watched Rookie of the Year recently, and I was like, that movie holds up. The guy who did the score for that LSU grad. Shout out.
Nice.
Shout out Bill Conti. You also did the Rocky.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, Bill Conti done a lot of good things.
Yeah, that's awesome. Go Tigers. Go Tigers.
The more you know.
The more you know. So I'm going to do my best John impression because I want to say a couple names.
You say just one. I mean, you can't just take one. You take-
I wanted to give a shout out to Terrell Burgess because you know
I-
how much I love Utah
Yeah.
youth. But then I looked a little bit more into how his career's gone since he got to the NFL. He's been targeted 26 times in coverage in his career. He has allowed 22 catches. He's a good tackler, but do not allow him anywhere near a coverage snap. So I'm going to go with another guy who's also underperformed that I liked coming out of college, and Chris Rumpf. I think this is a guy that he has a lot of. He's a leader, a leadership guy, locker room guy. He has experience with Brandon Staley, and I think that he has a lot of potential. Still, like I know he's been in the NFL a couple years, but he's still only 26. It's funny how we use only 26 for a guy like Chris Rumpf, and then Tyler Shuck, who isn't even 26 yet, is the oldest man in the team. No, but seriously, I do think Chris Rumpf he has potential to be that guy in the Brandon Staley defense that we've been saying, like, who else is going to fill that role? Like they have Isaiah Foskey that looks like he could be that 3-4 outside linebacker type, Fadil Diggs. But Chris Rumpf, he has experience with Brandon Staley. 2022 was the last year that he really flashed. He had 17 pressures in about 170 pass rush snaps, solid conversion rate. So I think that if they can tap into that, he's healthy again. He's had some time off. I think there's potential for him to be a pass rusher in this defense that at least can sneak into the roster based simply off of familiarity. Like you're talking how different this scheme is for a lot of different people. This is a guy that knows it and has some athletic upside as well. That's all you can really ask for.
I dig it. I think continuing to build that edge room was a smart move by New Orleans. I know they didn't make any real big investments outside of retaining Chase Young, but even just adding talent like him and Fadil Diggs and everything like that, at least you're rolling the dice a little bit there.
Yeah, he was getting some first team looks, mini camp or OTAs and such. I mean, so again, he's somebody that people are going to be under things. I mean, but there was other people that weren't looking.
I know,
weren't there. But I mean, it's just one of those things where I would think. I don't know if everybody, this is going to be a pool, but if everybody remembers Paris Harrelson, that was a guy that they brought in a long time ago that ended up, kind of just bringing a little bit of extra. And there, he was able to do a lot of things and rest in peace, man. He was one of the favorite players that I think they got from the 49ers. But I think Chris Rumpf, we look at the pass rushers, and we talked about Brian Brzee on last episode, but we expect probably Carl Granderson, Chase Young, Brian Brzee to lead the way in sacks and pressures. But who are the next guys? Chris Rumpf could be a guy. Is Isaiah Foskey going to finally put it all together? Is Devon Gottschall going to be that guy? Fadil Diggs you brought up too, and so there is opportunity. And outside of that, I don't know. We'll see. It might be Alante at this point.
All right. I love it. For me, I think I'll go over to the offensive side. And I've been trying to remember to say this the entire show, so I'm just going to say it now. Happy Juneteenth, everybody, by the way. I keep forgetting to say it. I wanted to say it at the beginning, but I screwed that up. So the other player for me that I really, really am looking forward to watching more of is tight end Jack Stoll. I brought him up on the show before, but I thought that he fit this underdog kind of tag uniquely well because he does have a path to the roster. It's just that you ask everybody to name the free agency additions from the 2025 offseason, and Jack Stoll's probably going to be the last guy that people mention as they go through. And I get it, right? He's a blocking tight end and all these other things, but he's a little bit more than that too. And we've seen him. Yeah. He's another guy that's kind of climbed up and gotten some first team rep. Now we got to remember no Foster Moreau in practices so far in terms of operation drills, all these other things. But I mean, that still has him. Oh, and Dallin Holker was dealing with injury too, but that still gives him the opportunities to be seen with, other top talent on the team around him and everything. So I do think that it's still important. And so I look at him as a guy that, yes, can contribute to you as a blocker, but is a much better, not just pass catcher, but run after the catch pass catcher, then people realize he's got 4.6 speed, and he is somebody that will absolutely welcome contact, run through defenders, all these other things. And so I think he just brings a lot of physicality to that tight end room. And I think that because of that, he has a really clear path to getting to the roster, but yet no one really talks about him because he's this kind of like newly added tight end that doesn't have a bunch of flashy stats in his past. Even during his time at Nebraska, he didn't have a ton of flashy stats there either. But I think that he's somebody that, because of his blocking ability, he can be on the field a ton and then be utilized as a pass catcher as well. And so I like his mix with guys like Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, as well as Dallin Holker, knowing that you're probably not going to have Taysom Hill for some undisclosed amount of time currently and everything. So just having sort of the extra weapons and whatever in the tight end room, I think helps quite a bit, because this offense is going to be all about versatility, and that's what the tight end position is all about. And I think he checks some of those boxes.
How much of a lead or like of an edge up does Dallin Holker really have on these guys? Because he's been someone that's around they obviously like, but hasn't produced.
I wouldn't say he's got.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just see his name mentioned the first a bunch ahead of those guys, because I guess he's been around for a year.
Yeah. He's incumbent, so he's going to get nods and things like that. But I don't know if that's true for the team. John, what do you think?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think Stahl is probably the guy. And look, here's what I would also say: they don't have a fullback on the roster. They're going to use a tight end there. I think Jack Stahl is going to be that guy. Like, I really feel like he's going to end up being that guy, especially if they go 2 tight end sets. Again, we've kind of pointed out and we've talked about it that Juwan has some opportunity in blocking, but if I'm going to choose my run base, if I'm going to run, I'm TJ Paganetti, I'm having Jack Stahl and Foster Moreau out there doing as my primary blockers. I mean, just because that's their strength. Juwan's more of a pass catching tight end. So I would say that, Dallin Holker probably is the odd man out. I mean, he's got a lot of talent. He made the roster last year, never was really on the field. He was a decoy all the time when he would come out. Like, we were watching during commercial breaks, he would come out in the base and it's like, oh, Dallin Holker is going to come in. And immediately when it comes in, he goes right back to the sideline. So it's just kind of a weird situation. But I think Holker has really a lot of skill set. But if you're asking me now, it's definitely Stahl's got a way bigger advantage over somebody like Holker.
I could see them keeping, to John's point about the not having a fullback, I could also see them keeping 4 tight ends. I don't think that you typically make a decision like that. You're not like, okay, we're going to keep this many times. It's who did enough to make the roster, and then you shape your roster to that. But I do think that with no fullback, there's room for that extra running back or that extra tight end or whatever. It might really end up meaning that there's just room for an extra defensive back. But I mean, it's very well could spell an opportunity for all 4 of those guys to the top of the tight end room until Taysom Hill is available, and then they'll have to make a decision at that point.
I'd rather not contribute to the death of the fullback position, but that's just me.
I know.
I'm with you.
On this, good ones. This is a very fullback friendly podcast, I can assume, based off of our other agreements.
I'm gonna have to retire my fullback season tweets. That's crazy.
Man.
Can I still do them if there's a tight end at fullback?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you might as well, right? Because he's playing the fullback position, right? Yeah. Just like Taysom was playing the fullback position last year, and that's what's interesting is, and we bring up Taysom, even when he comes back, I don't know what his role is going to be.
Right.
I don't know if they're going to be like, we'll use him exactly every way what we used him in the past, or if they're just going to stick to, is he going to be a back? Is he going to be a fullback? Is he going to be a tight end? Like, is he going to play special teams? I don't know. I don't know you do that with a guy coming off a major injury like that.
Kellen Moore did tell me that they would plan to still use him at quarterback. He said that during one of the press conferences.
Yeah.
What that means, though, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a lot of QB power, right?
He's the most Jalen Hurts like quarterback on the roster.
Right. Yeah. So it makes sense. But still, that doesn't mean that he's also a tight end, also a fullback, also a running back, and also a special teamer, like John was saying. But it sounds like he's still going to contribute from the quarterback position. So we'll see.
That means you should have led with, the Saints have a new starting quarterback, maybe. That's how I interpreted that.
I love it.
Well, we're going to stick with the offensive side of the ball, and we're going to talk about a little bit of a weird conversation about who's going to finish third on the team in receiving yards. I mean, it's obvious. It's obvious who's going to finish first on the season in receiving yards. Probably going to be Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. So let's get into the third. I'm asking you who the third in receiving yards is going to be for this season. Let's start with Ross.
If I have to assume that
you
number
don't
one
have
and number
to.
two,
I mean, you don't have to.
I was gonna say, if I have to assume that number one and number two are Chris Olave, then my answer is simple.
Well, one and two are Chris Olave.
Number one and number two are Chris Olave and Rashid
Kamara would
Shaheed.
be-
My bad.
Yeah,
So then, like
Kamara.
that to me would mean Alvin Kamara is third. Like that's an easy one for me.
I mean, you could say Shaheed's third and Kamara second. That's the fun of this. The fun of this. Let's see.
Yeah, I'm not anti that either. Like I think
I
Alvin Kamara,
was thinking mostly wide receivers. I didn't specify that.
Okay, so then who's going to be the third
receiver?
Third in receiving yards as a wide receiver? I'm gonna buck in a trend that I'm expecting then, and I'm gonna go with Bub Means. Dang it! If it's Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, I know who the next logical person is. I get it. I know who it is. I understand. I'm not crazy. I'm purposefully going counterculture here, and I'm gonna go with Bub Means. Why? Because I think Bub Means is at the healthiest that he's been since he's been a New Orleans Saint, which is good. I think that he might be the guy that has the greatest potential for longevity because he had an injury and setback, but we're talking about multiple injuries elsewhere at the wide receiver room. And I think that he's looked good out during OTAs in minicamp, and that he has progressed, particularly as a route runner, understanding how to stack and use leverage, good releases off the line of scrimmage, good breaks at the top of his routes. Like he's cleaned up a lot of things in his game. He's made his route running a little bit more crisp. Does he still have ways to go? Absolutely. Of course, everyone does. But I will pick Bub Means because I also think he gives you the physical presence to make some of the tough catches over the middle of the field in the short and intermediate area that allows him maybe to be able to gain some more of those, not necessarily the chunk yards, but be more incremental in terms of his game. So for those reasons, I'll say Bub Means is the third wide receiver in receiving yards.
You heard it here first.
I did it.
John.
And I'm sticking with that. I'm writing it on my wall.
Are you going with the obvious, or are you going to go with another off-the-wall pick?
No, I think probably the obvious is thing. And here's a thing. I'm glad we brought this segment up because just from I'm a nerd too, Dylan. Just spoiler alert for everybody. I actually have kept track of the top three trios for the Saints going back to 2006. And the last time three receivers actually led the team in receiving was 2016. Brandon Cooks, Michael Thomas, and Willie Snead. Every other year, it's been receiver or two receivers and a running back, or receiver tight end and a running back. I got to go with Brandon Cooks. I mean, I just feel like Cooks has a lot more of the upside here, especially if we're talking about wide receivers. I mean, I think that's exactly where the direction would go. I think Cooks has a lot to offer here. I'm not completely convinced that he might not be number 2 at the end of the year when it's all said and done when it comes to the receiving department. I just feel like, again, I bring up the point where you're looking at Tyler Shuck and Spencer Rattler, regardless who it is. You want to lean on that veteran, and Brandon Cooks can run all the different routes you want. He's not just a deep threat guy. He's somebody that can move the sticks a good bit. And, most teams I think are going to gravitate towards guarding Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave. And so I think Cooks, depending on where you put him, is that on the outside? Or are you going to run him in the slot? Where are you going to put Brandon Cooks? But I think he has a chance to catch a lot more balls than maybe we're thinking about right now, which in turn is going to give him a little bit more yardage. And he's still got game break speed. He can still do a lot of after the catch. And so I got to go with Cooksy. I really feel like he's going to be there.
I like that.
I dig it. I think that's the most accurate response. That's the
Sure.
one that's, I think those
It's not the
three,
sexiest like Ross taking Bub Means, but it is
You know,
definitely the most accurate. I
I
feel
think
like
it's the most accurate one. 100%. Like I said, I'm going counterculture,
I'm
but
leaving, second maybe in the team. That
Yeah.
you've heard here first. So
right. Yeah, I think if those
I'm back
three
again.
guys, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, and Brandon Cooks, in almost any order, are the top three wide receivers, then like no one would be surprised by that at the end of the season. I think that's what you're hoping to be, right? That's where the investment is. I think the issue becomes if Brandon Cooks is your number one guy, because that probably means that there were injuries to both Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed in that situation. That's so I just want to clarify why I said almost every order.
If we're going off a real land, that's probably a realistic scenario about the injuries and stuff, but I hope not this year.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
I think I've been bouncing back and forth because I kind of want to go with a fun pick, but also I think that Brandon Cooks is my answer, just because I think that he, for pretty much every reason that John said. So I'm gonna have my fun pick, and I'm gonna
it's June.
Yeah,
be wrong. Be crazy.
Fun. All right, Keenan Allen. If I was going to pick a free agent, I would pick Gabe Davis because I still feel like they'll circle back around to that. I still like him. I like what we could potentially bring. I'm going to go with Donovan Peoples-Jones. I do really think that he is a guy that I am confident in can step into this offense and still have a role. If it's not Brandon Cooks, I think it'll be Bub Means or DPJ. I think that those are the guys all in the conversation to be the most dynamic. And then if you add in other position groups, then it's going to be, I think before there's a third receiver, I think you'll get Juwan Johnson and Alvin Kamara at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Juwan Johnson led the team in receiving yards last year, but he did it with 548 receiving yards. This is actually what today's Locked On Saints is about. Today's episode, I took a look at who's going to lead in receiving yards. And 2 of the last 5 years, a non-wide receiver has led in receiving yards. And 3 of the last 5 years, the leading receiver did not top 1,000 yards. And so like it's tough to predict like where that's going to go just because of how much injuries impact that. Injuries at quarterback can impact that. Like injuries at other positions can impact what's going to happen at wide receiver, right? Like injuries at the offensive line could impact how much time a quarterback has for routes to develop for wide receivers. And then so a lot of check downs and dump offs then increase the amount of receiving yards that a guy like Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, or Alvin Kamara end up having. And so like it's a grab bag almost.
Yeah, last year for the Eagles, it was actually AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. Your 1-2 punch. Then it was Dallas Goedert, Grant Calcaterra, then Saquon Barkley, then their third wide receiver in Jahan Dotson with just 270. With 216 was their third highest receiver. Had 200 yards.
Goddard didn't surpass 500 yards, right?
No, he didn't.
Yeah, and that was your third leading. Yeah, and that was your third leading receiver. And I think if I remember correctly, the Eagles threw they were 29th in the NFL, I think, in passing attempts last year. Like they threw among the fewest passes in 2024. And so if Kellen Moore brings that over, then like really any of these guys could end up being the third leading receiver, let alone third leading wide receiver, because there might not be a lot of passes to go around if the Saints are finding success on the ground.
Yeah, I'll trade taking 180 yards on the ground every game, averaging that for a lack of passing. I'll always 100%. Because that's where the league is evolved. And I mean, look at the teams that are making playoffs and doing those things. They're leading the NFL in the rushing department, so it just makes sense.
Yeah, there was a time. Oh, go ahead.
Also, just to show how there's different personnel with Kellen Moore, there's different. So 2023 with the Chargers, it was Keenan Allen. Shout out. I know you're listening. I hope you're smiling. Josh Palmer, Austin Eckler, Quentin Johnson, Gerald Everett, Donald Parham. So there's a little bit, but also Gerald Everett top. He finished 5th on this team, and he had just about as much as Dallas Goedert did for the Eagles last year.
Yeah,
so
right.
It's all about sharing the wealth. And I do think it's just it's different personnel, and I think that this Saints team is going to try and be more of the. Yeah, I think our third leading receiver is going to have 400 yards, but hopefully we made up for it on the ground.
Yeah, I could see that being the case. There was a time in the NFL to where, like, as a defense, you could be middle of the road as a run defense and be a top defense in the NFL because you're keeping points off the board and everything like that. I think those days are over. I don't think you can be that anymore. I think you have to be an effective defense as a whole. It used to be like, oh, just invest in your pass defense, and then the run game becomes what the run game is, as long as your offense is able to, your offense became your best run defense, everything. But that's kind of changed in today's league to where you've got more 2 tight end sets. You've got more 2 running back sets. You have more defenses that are playing too high. And so because of that, you're challenging offenses to run, and offenses are just kind of going, okay. And then you have teams like the Philadelphia Eagles and the Baltimore Ravens who are lining up these 350 plus pound offensive linemen that say, well, you can get as small as you want. We're just going to get bigger. And then they win that way. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think you can. I think you absolutely can be a team now that focuses on building your run game and win games because of it in a way that maybe you couldn't less than 5 years ago. It's kind of crazy, like how quickly that changed.
I would be shocked if this isn't Alvin Kamara's first 1,000-yard rushing season.
Right? Yeah. He was so close last year. Had it not been for the injury at the end of last year and everything, he had what, 500? No, he was 950 something.
Yeah, he wasn't far off.
956, something like that.
And he didn't care about it either. So
no,
but I think he can get there this year.
Yeah,
he can.
But I would be surprised too, Dylan, if especially if he's healthy enough to play, let's say 15 games.
Yeah,
I would be surprised if he's not a 1,000-yard rusher this year.
It just feels like the path that they're leading to, especially with not adding an elite wide receiver, the biggest dart on their dartboard this year. They brought it. They have some guys that I guess they probably feel like, yeah, we can survive with a Bud Means or a Donovan Peoples-Jones in the room because they're at least big and will block.
Yeah, and a Cedric Wilson Jr.
And a Cedric Wilson Jr. I keep that. I think that is the Saints player that I forget exists the most. No shade to him. I just think it happens. I completely he's like, whoop, out of my brain that Cedric Wilson's around.
They call him the Professor. That's his nickname. And everything. And so, maybe that'll help. I don't know. And one mixtapes.
I'm sorry.
And one mixtapes. It becomes an interesting conversation too, to go from like who is the third leading wide receiver to who is the second leading running back. Like maybe a future conversation for the show. Yeah. Because I think it's another one where when you try to think about like, okay, who are the ones that are going to come up and kind of take on those supporting roles and everything, not just who's going to be like the leaders in each room, because that's kind of carved out. And that's part of the rebuild, is that there's like the top guys and then there's the others. There's not really a lot of that middle class right now and everything, but they're fixing that, right, with the draft selections and everything like that. But I think figuring out like who's going to be that second or third in any of these major categories, it's actually a pretty big question, because if you have good production at those spots, you're a pretty successful football team all of a sudden, right? Like if your third leading wide receiver is your third leading receiver as a whole, and they're over 400 or 500 yards, you've had a pretty productive season, right? Unless you have 3 guys around 500 yards, but assuming that that's not the case. And then same thing with like whoever your second running back is. If your second running back's over 300, 400 rushing yards and it's not Taysom Hill, you've done something right somewhere. You know what I mean? And so it is interesting to figure out like where are those other contributions going to come from the team outside of the big names, the established guys.
John, I wanted to ask you, the Saints were build from the inside out. That's what they did this year. That's where they started. Where does wide receiver come in terms of importance to the building, the centerpiece for this franchise going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be important in the sense of if you are going to be a running team, you need players that are going to be willing to block. And I think that, Lance talked about it. You got to have that willingness to block, first of all. And then second of all, you got to be able to do, and it's not just at the point of attack, it's downfield, whether it's moving to the right, moving to the left, whatever the concept is, or your decoy, all those different things are going to matter. And I think the Saints have some receivers that have that IQ. Again, if it's a rundown, it's most likely going to be Cedric Wilson Jr. that's going to be in there. That does all this, the rundown support. I'm interested to see if Bub Means can take more of a role there, because he is actually a much better blocker than some people might give him credit for. And we saw that last year as well. I want to see if Donovan Peoples-Jones can do that as well. And so it kind of leaves out Kevin Austin Jr. and Mason Tipton. I think they're kind of the odd men out in this receiver room at this point. Dante Pettis. Pettis is a good call. I forgot about Dante Pettis. He said he forgets about Cedric Wilson Jr. I just completely forgot about Dante Pettis. I think he's going to be on the 53 actually. So
me too.
But he can block too, and so you got veterans that are able to do that. And I just feel like it's important. You got to have those guys who are gritty, who may not catch 100 balls at the end of the year, may not do 1,000 yards and stuff, but can offer a little bit of upside. But I think it's super important for this Saints offense to find those guys and identify those guys. And look, if you continue to swing the club and try to draft some players that could potentially help you out in the future, I was surprised that they didn't draft a receiver. I thought we were all going to get, we all thought they were going to draft a receiver. And so I would think that, they're very important. Tight ends may be a little bit more important in my opinion, but receivers are going to eventually need to step up a lot more in this offense to be able to do what the Saints want to accomplish on the ground.
Yeah. Well, coming up next, we're going to be talking about a guy who could be in this top 5 on the team in receiving, just not at wide receiver. Wrapping us up today. Hey. Wrapping us up today. Let's continue our season preview for these players. Let's jump back to the offensive side of the ball and do Foster Moreau, a guy that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, sneakily one of the most important players on the team last year. Like most
sneakily, but yeah.
Well, just in terms of, I just don't think he gets the respect or like the recognition for what he did. He played all 17 games. He was one of the top. He was one of the top reliable guys in the red zone, a place that they struggled in, and obviously a great leader and a great story. And maybe it's my LSU side coming out, but I thought it would be fun talking about Foster Moreau.
Yeah.
Shout out. So let's start with Ross. Let's start with Ross. How do you feel about Foster Moreau, and what do you think about him this year?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that he was one of the most important pieces last season. I think that he was important to several phases of the game. I was gonna say of the football game, but then I was like, it'd be funnier if I just stopped at of the football.
Of the football. I'd try that.
But I do think that he contributed like everywhere, right? He lived up to his brand as an all-around tight end. But it's interesting, if you look at his last 2 seasons, they are his 4th and 3rd least targeted seasons in his last 4 years. And we could say like, oh, well, Chris Olave, and there's also, but remember that he was also like with Darren Waller in Las Vegas, right? With the Raiders. And so his last 2 seasons with the Raiders, he was in a situation to where he was like the second tight end and not at all the focus there, where Devontae Adams was there and, all these other things. And then he ends up having more targets those 2 seasons than he had over the course of his 2 seasons so far with New Orleans. So I think that like with all of that taken into consideration, I also think that there's more that he can be involved in this offense, and there's more that he can do. I think the Saints over the course of the past couple of years have really used their offensive linemen as an opportunity to use their tight ends as an opportunity to build out their offensive line further, as opposed to like midway through the season, they eventually go like, oh, right, those guys can catch. And then they get involved in the passing game and stuff like that. And so like, which is funny because like Clint Kubiak, like the whole thing with Clint Kubiak was like, oh, he's going to use the tight ends quite a bit. And then he did, but he used them as blockers mostly, didn't necessarily use them as pass catchers. So I think Foster Moreau was one of the most important pieces. The way that his season ended last year was devastating. I hated the fact that, like, in the last game, he has that injury. He's already back out on the field on the sideline working with the other players and things like that. And then now, he has a real opportunity to kind of be even more involved. So yeah, he was important, but there's also more that he can do if the opportunities are allotted to him. So I'm excited to see what his 2025 looks like. And great leader too, just, as a guy, as a part of the locker room.
They teach that at LSU. It's one of those things.
Yeah.
John,
is that what the L stands for? Every time they hold the L up?
Leadership. State University.
Oh man, John, what do you think about Foster Moreau? Do you hate him? Do you love him? Let us know.
Nobody could hate Foster Moreau. Golly, what's funny is Ross and I, when we did training camp last year, he was one of our camp MVPs. I mean, you talk about a guy who every single day brought the energy, and like if the offense was looking like trash, you're going to hear about it from Foster Moreau. Like, there is nobody louder on the football field when they're practicing than Foster Moreau is. He's super competitive. He's going to tell you if something looks like dog poo or if the offense needs to get their stuff together. He's going to be the first one that says it. And so he sets a real tone for energy that I think fans just don't see or maybe don't even appreciate in the sense of that. But look, he played extremely well during training camp last year. Again, Ross and I had to give him an MVP from training camp just because of the work he put in. And it wasn't just because of that. It was because of the way he played out there. And look, again, he does a lot of the dirty work. I've always said this. He does the dirty work nobody appreciates and nobody sees. That's kind of what the fullback does, is they do the dirty work. Nobody cares about what they do unless they mess up. And Foster was able to have 5 touchdowns, the most he's had since he was a rookie, right? Mm-hmm. And so, again, he offers that. And I think he had, 43 targets last year is what he ended up. That was the second highest of his career, or third highest, 54 with the Raiders this last year. And then 413 on the receiving front, just 7 behind his career high. And so using him a little bit more isn't a bad thing. He can break tackles. He's not going to beat you with speed, but he is going to make up with it in physicality and just is a sneaky player to get open in, situations where you need a quarterback needs somebody like a Foster Moreau. He was more of a security blanket for Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener than I think, Juwan Johnson or any of the other players were. He was that security blanket for them. And so, look, I think Foster's super underappreciated. I know he brings the energy. I know he is super talented. And so if you don't like him, well, A, he doesn't care. And B, he's going to probably make fun of you in front of your face. And one of the dudes in the locker room who always has the energy, always brings it. He's like the same player every single day.
Do you think that he could have just a repeat of last season and it would be a success in this new offense like that? I mean, that's 500 yards, 5 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Yes, especially if 2 of his biggest plays of the season don't get called back because of penalty.
Right. Like, yes.
That would have changed his entire season. That's 2 more touchdowns. That would have been another 40-something yards, like all this other stuff. That we would be talking about him entirely differently had those 2 plays counted. You know what I mean? Like, and what one of them was against Dallas, and then another one was like later on in the season or whatever it was, to where like
the Raiders.
No,
that was the Taysom call. That was a Taysom call.
That's right.
That was garbage too.
But, there were a couple of his biggest plays of the season got called back because of injury. So let me go back to the concerns at the very beginning of the show and say, hey, or it got called back because of penalty. So I'll go back to the beginning of the show and say, hey, another big concern about this team is can they not have a bunch of penalties that negate big plays?
It is with a States team that is young and new coach. That is a big ask.
100%. But
I also feel like that's something that we'll see Kellen Moore kind of come out a little bit more in comfortability and saying that, look, we're getting to know, but I want to see when he's fiery about some of this stuff. Right. I want to see when he's going to rip into somebody like Darren Rizzi did Matt Hayball last year. That had nothing to do with penalty, but play smart and don't be dumb. And we talked about the pass rush, how many plays have been wiped away during a penalty and all this other stuff. Like, they have been their worst enemy in the past several years. And that is not a disciplined team when that happens. So, yes, they have to be much more disciplined and not do stupid stuff. Easy
Yeah.
for
I
us
mean,
to
it's
say.
it's a big part of it. And so yeah, I don't know. I do think that a repeat of last year would be perfectly viable for to call a successful season for Foster Moreau. Ideally, if those other plays end up, sticking around
Yeah.
or being upheld,
Yeah.
excuse me.
I feel like with Juwan, we've talked a lot about tight end, and it feels like the Saints like answered it really early on in the offseason by giving Juwan Johnson that extension. But if you have a better season from Juwan Johnson and you get 500 yards and 5 touchdowns from Foster Moreau, I mean, can you ask more out of a tight end room than that?
That's a pretty big season.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big
So
season.
yeah, and I do feel like they're even with Foster Moreau last year having that, the 500 yards, 5 touchdowns or whatever, there was still room for Juwan Johnson to have had a bigger year. So if they capitalize on that, that is a completely different look out of your two-man tight end room. And then you have Taysom Hill whenever he's healthy eventually in that room as well. And all of a sudden, it's looking like a solid team and a solid group.
Yeah. I don't think that they're massively competitive or anything, but it's the building block, right? Like there's this idea of like where they were last year. Can you be better than that? And I think that example that you just shared, to where if we're talking about like, 2 wide receivers that top the receiving charts for the team, a good season that includes 1,000-yard season rushing from Alvin Kamara for the first time in his career, and then 2 standout performers at tight end, you could finish with 5 wins in that. You know what I mean? But you've shown building blocks towards success, and you've shown a momentum shift towards success. And so I do think that there is a way that ends up creating some improvement or perception of improvement for your team that you can sell and then keep building from that going into 2026. Like I genuinely like what the Saints record is at the end of 2025 is simply what the Saints record is at 2025. And the only way that it matters is if they're in the playoffs
or the first overall pick.
Right. But like what the record is simply what the record is. What do you do in this next offseason to continue building on what you've done this offseason? And then what is your record in 2026? Then I'm interested. But to me, it's, can you show these little building blocks that we're talking about? And can you find these little examples of success and improvement on both sides of the football? And I think that's got to be the big thing.
Yeah. John, how do you feel about this offense overall after a couple of months? Getting used to like this current configuration.
Yeah, I think one of the things to hit on too is there's a lot of the language that has been simplified in this offense too, which is another thing to where it's not super complicated. Now, whether that's a good thing or bad thing, we'll see. But I feel like at least making direction or making strides to simplify things. And again, everybody's gonna remember this offense is going to be a hybrid. It's going to be a little bit of Dallas. It's going to be a little bit of Los Angeles Chargers. It's going to be a little bit of Philly. It's going to be a little bit of Saints mixed in. It's going to be encompassing of all that. Now, what that looks like, we'll have to figure that out and we'll have to see, but you're going to be able to identify some of those things. Like they're not totally just getting away saying, well, some of the Saints stuff they've done in the past, we're just going to throw that out of the trash. No, they want to keep using some of that stuff. And, guys like Brendan Nugent and Joel Thomas, those are guys that obviously are familiar with that. And you add in TJ Paganetti in the run department, I think that also helps. But I feel good overall about this offense. I just say it's like, I want to be convinced, you know what I mean? I want to not totally just buy in and say, well, Kellen Moore, they got a new play caller. They've changed out the staff. They've upgraded some pieces. They've done all this. And now they're going to be this high prolific offense. Like, no, they still got a lot to prove here. And again, we've talked about it earlier in the show, top of the show, about injuries and how that can derail this team. And quarterback's that most important position, I feel like, is can they get the quarterback right? And if they can, the quarterback runs the offense, he executes the offense. And so if the quarterback can do that, then I think their offensive outlook is much better than we give it credit for. But, we'll find out early on because they play the Cardinals, they play the Bills. I'm not Bills. I'm sorry. The 49ers on the second week. Bills were later. That's later in the month of September. But those are some offenses or some defenses that you're going to be really tested against. And I'm really interested to see where they stack up. And I'm not going to celebrate if they win those first 2 games, but those are good defenses you're playing in the first half of the year. And I think they have the trajectory to get better as the season goes along. And that's, I think, all anyone can ask for.
Well, I can ask for a little bit more.
Sure.
I could ask for y'all to come back next week and listen to Saints Squad. Thank you for listening to the Saints Squad. Check out me, Ross, John, and even Lance, who is getting off the phone with his grandma, recovering from a cobra bite. You can check us out on our socials for the latest. We'll be right back here on Monday to continue talking about New Orleans Saints off-season stuff. Woo! Only like 10 more episodes of this show until we get a game recap or something.
Sure, something like that.
But until then, be sure to make Locked On Saints your second listen of the day.